Hello, and welcome to another video in the series of videos that I'm creating to summarize a book I've written on solution architecture and the solution architecture framework called Spidercia. So this video is going to focus on the topic of people, process, and requirements, effectively who and what is driving the need for a solution. So who are the stakeholders? What are the business processes? What are the requirements, acceptance criteria? So this topic works very, very closely with the solution architecture topic that I discussed in the previous video. And this is going to outline how we engage with those stakeholders, we get those requirements and help them work with the solution architect to shape the solution. So before we go further, so a little bit about the book. So the book is a guide to professional solution architecture using a framework I've devised called Spidercia. So Spidercia is a framework for solution architecture, and it incorporates a number of different topics to help create what I call an optimal solution architecture, given the constraints that you work within the solution architect. So the topics are solution architecture itself, the people, process, and requirements, which we're going to cover in this video. We're getting into the elements of design and engineering for information system engineering, so effectively applications and data, the deployment and infrastructure, so where you host those applications, how you test the solution, how you govern the solution in terms of making sure it's fit for purpose, risks are managed effectively, etc. How you automate the solution using well-established processes such as continuous integration and deployment and DevOps, and how you operate the solution in life, all with the mindset of delivering using Agile methods. A little bit about me. So I've worked in the IT industry for many years, across many different business domains, and across the entire IT life cycle. I've always been most at home in the area of solution architecture. That's what I'm most passionate about. That's what I enjoy. That's what I think I'm good at, and it's an area I think I've got ideas on how to approach solution architecture from a best practice perspective. So I covered this in the previous video, but I think it's useful to reiterate the importance of solution engagement. And this is effectively getting off on the right foot with solution architecture. So when you start a solution architecture, you need to work closely with your stakeholders. You need to identify your stakeholders before you work closely with them, and that's something we'll get into later on. And you need to understand from their perspective what are their goals, what they're trying to achieve with this solution, what is the enterprise architecture we're going to work within, so that one of your stakeholders or potentially multiple stakeholders will be from the enterprise architecture community. What are the constraints that we're going to work within when we're developing this solution in terms of cost, time scales, resource scales, etc. What are the related solutions? What's other solutions going to work with, and maybe in terms of system integration or some element of process or even reuse? And what is the business process currently? Is there an existing business process we're going to take and improve? Or it might be brand new, so there might not be anything existing, but in most cases you're going to have some element of existing process. And through the engagement, then we need some idea of what requirements. So this may be the very initial high level requirements, and establishing the requirements backlog. We need to have some idea of the solution. It might just be a very high level, big picture, end-to-end view of what the solution is going to comprise of in terms of components, systems, people, that sort of thing, and what timescales are we delivering to. Is this going to be a multi-year solution or shorter than that? And what approach are we going to take to delivering it? Hopefully some element, some type of agile delivery. So it's probably important as well to, before we go into more detail around process and requirements, let's compare requirements and architecture and design. So requirements are something you need, something you need, and in the context of this, something for the business, something the business needs, something that's going to be valuable for the business. And architecture and design is how to achieve this, value, in this case, in terms of a solution. So basically, how to take something we need, something that's going to be valuable for the business, and how to actually achieve that value. And I always equate architecture design is to a plan. And if you think about the schematics of an architect who's for a building architect, you think of these plans, these blueprints that they create. So, and then this is effectively what we're doing in IT. We're creating plans to deliver functionality via information systems that's going to be of use to the business. So now on to stakeholders. So stakeholders are the groups of people that are going to be involved in the solution. So it doesn't necessarily need to be people that are going to drive requirements. It could be people that are going to be building and operating the solution, although they will have input as well. We need to make sure all stakeholders are engaged, whether they're business levels or business requirements, or their implementation, actually going to be building the solution, or they're operational, they're going to be operating the solution. It's really, really important everyone is involved in the stakeholder engagement. These are the common stakeholder types that I've listed. There are obviously maybe more, then there will be specialist stakeholders, but these are kind of generic types, and these are elaborated more in the book. So in terms of managing stakeholders, obviously there's a lot of stakeholders in that previous slide, and if you flesh it out into individual stakeholders across the business for large solutions, you could be getting into many dozens. So you do need to prioritize your stakeholder management, and this is quite a common diagram that people probably might have seen in terms of satisfying stakeholders. So there'll be stakeholders with low to high interest, stakeholders with low to high influence. So you kind of probably want to prioritize on the actively engaged, but you need to engage all stakeholders, but you need to prioritize your time around this area. The business process analysis is, as it says, analyzing processes which help the business run, and almost every solution has some element of business process in terms of how people do their tasks and use information systems to do their tasks. So what's required of information systems to help business processes run. And there's lots of techniques you can use around business process analysis. Again, a bit more information in the book around this, and these are some of the techniques. And a solution architect should have some business analyst skills. It's also depends on the organization. Some organizations have got dedicated business analysts. In some, the solution architect will be the business analyst. So you need to have some business analyst skills and some appreciation of these techniques. The requirements engineering is a really, really important part of solution architecture. You need to have the skills and the tool sets and the mindset as well to elicit requirements and analyze requirements from your stakeholders. Elicitation is effectively clarifying requirements, getting stuff out of people's heads or from various other sources, documents and diagrams, the whole variety of sources to describe the as-is situation. Getting a lot of information and analysing it means, well, what do we want to achieve? We know what the as-is. What do we want the to be? And there's a whole list of potential problems we can face during that process. I'll pick out a few. Ambiguity, a very, very common one. the requirement's just not clear. So part of the elicitation is to make them clear, make people understand really what they want, not what they think they want. Lots of duplication, lots of conflicts. Lots of requirements may no longer be required. And this is where Agile is really important. If you need something 6 months ago, you might not need it now. It's making sure the requirements are up to date and still of value to the business. Some requirements don't have stakeholders, they might have moved on. So is it still required? Is it still value? Timescale is unclear. Prioritization, very, very important. We need to understand the business might not need the requirement until 6 months, a year down the line. That's fine. We just need to make sure that's prioritized. So lots of things to consider when doing requirements engineering. And this quite complicated looking diagram, effectively what I'm trying to show here is we've got what I call a jumble of requirements. We've got lots of people almost think of it brainstorming, chucking requirements here now. It's kind of off the top of their head perhaps, but it's unstructured. It's the key thing, it's unstructured. And what a solution architect needs to do with a business analyst hat on, or solution architect working with a business analyst needs to address is the structure of requirements. I think probably the best way to do it. How do we create a structure from business goals through to requirement stories, be they functional or non-functional, through to exceptions criteria. So you've got this kind of hierarchy which will let you plan. Really important. If you've got this job, you can't plan on this basis. You've got to structure it in terms of, you've got to categorize it, you've got to prioritize it. Bear in mind we discussed, I think it's the second video around sprints. So you're going to work out in terms of your requirements backlog, what's more important than others. And this hierarchy of business goals through to requirements, through to acceptance criteria, gives you that hierarchy you can use to do your planning of both your solution and your implementation of your solution. Requirement engagement techniques. Lots of different options here. Again, I'm just going to summarize here, much more detail in the book. Brainstorming is a very common one. So that's really us throwing out ideas and just getting stuff out of people's heads. Interview is very, very useful because we're trying to, usually on a one-to-one basis, sitting down with different stakeholders, getting their concerns, their views on what the solution needs to do, and getting some detailed information from that perspective. Focus groups is good, so it's not a one-to-one, that's a many to one or many to many. But again, focused usually on particular topics. So you might have a focus group around security, to give an example, or operations, but getting the experts in a room and discussing focused topics. I won't go through them all, but you can see there's a whole variety of different ways to engage your stakeholder and elicit and analyze requirements. A little bit on functional requirements, or requirements types, sorry. Functional requirements are, as it's stated, a function of what the solution should do. In Agile terms, often called features. So what should the solution do to add value? If there's a feature that doesn't add value, then it's a pointless feature. And Agile is very strong on that, making sure functionality adds value. Then there's non-functional requirements. So this doesn't add value, but what it does is ensure the solution is fit for purpose in terms of, is it performant, is it resilient, is it secure, does it meet with regulatory needs? So it does add value to a certain extent. So it's making sure the solution is worthwhile, because even if you had a fully functional solution which has all the features you want, but if it wasn't performant, if it wasn't resilient, if it didn't meet regulatory compliance, it would be worthless because it would fall down on those areas and it wouldn't be usable. So very important, both functional and non-functional requirements go hand in hand. They should both be incorporated into sprints, part of your backlog, and both be addressed by the solution. I've mentioned prioritization already. Moscow is a common means. There's many different other ones, but Moscow is very much one of the most prevalent means of prioritizing requirements. So this is must have, should have, could have, would have. Another approach is MVP, minimal viable product. So what you absolutely need for the solution to be usable within the context of your business. There's lots of other means. You can score things 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever, high, medium, low priority. Doesn't really matter to a huge amount. It's consistency. Again, is the watchword here. You've got to be consistent in your requirements prioritization approach, and have that approach throughout the life cycle of the solution. A little bit here about the requirements repository. In the past, you quite often had requirement specifications. That's a much more common thing in the waterfall methodology. More so in Agile, you have what's called a backlog, and it's a much more flexible way of managing requirements. So in the requirement specification, tends to be you would work with your stakeholders or even be given a requirement specification and there off you go create a solution. That's a really, really rigid way of doing it. So a much more flexible approach is you have your backlog, which consists of a number of different levels of requirements. So the broad theme, the epics, kind of grouping of stories, and then the stories themselves. Stories kind of this is what I want to achieve, this is the feature I want, or you can have non-functional stories as well, and then the stories in turn get broken down into tasks to implement those stories. So it's kind of hierarchical, but very flexible. So you can move stories within sprints. So you'd allocate stories to sprints, and within that sprint, you could do your solution architecture and development and implementation to implement that story. And I've covered sprint-based architecture in I think it was the second video. But it's important up front to establish your backlog process. However you want to manage requirements, it could be a tool to do it, could be just a spreadsheet. But important to have that view of how you're going to manage requirements. So certainly in more complex solutions, you can have thousands of requirements input by dozens of different stakeholders, and a key role is a product owner who will manage all that. And I cover this more in the solution architecture role part of the book, but I often equate a product owner and a solution architect. Now, that might not always be the case, and it depends on organizational preference, but to me, the product owner is a person end to end with the view of what's required for a solution. And I think I personally like to see myself when I'm doing solution architecture as also the product owner, and that's usually the way I've gone about things. So the solution architect will or the product owner, sorry, will have some responsibilities around prioritizing, decomposing requirements, but effectively maintaining the backlog. A bit about the life cycle of requirements. So you can go through from identifying the requirement through to having the requirement accepted. I will point out here, so this might look a little bit waterfall from here to here, but please notice the arrows bidirectional. So at every point here, we have feedback. So we identify a requirement, we prioritize a requirement. Part of that process could be, well, actually, that's not a requirement. We don't need that, drop it. Or we validate the requirement as part of to validate its prioritization. See here, every part is feedback. So these are just steps, but they're not unidirectional steps or bidirectional steps. They've got feedback throughout the process. But it is also important to understand the status that a requirement is at. So yeah, a requirement could be it could be just early stages, could be just, well, just prioritize it, but we don't really know much in terms of the details, so we've got to go through a validation and verification approach. So important to have some sort of status of requirements built into your solution delivery process. A bit more about the pitfalls here. So I mentioned pitfalls in the previous video to do with solution architecture. So pitfalls to do with the people, process, and requirements. There's quite a few obvious ones here, but one is not talking to stakeholders, just maybe reading up some documents, maybe getting some other people to talk to them. But unless you're actively engaged with your stakeholders, you're always going to be off to a bad start. Frankly, you've got to get those relationships going. You've got to be working as a virtual team. You will have different backgrounds. You will have different skills and knowledge, but really important that you do engage and you collaborate with those people to get off the best start for an optimal solution architecture. Sure, you not understanding business context is kind of related to this. You might have solution architects can be technical people. They can come from technical backgrounds, but that does not mean you ignore the business context, because while being hands-on and techie is really fun, you could be creating stuff that the business doesn't require. So I've mentioned the word business value in this these videos many times, and I can't say it enough, frankly, that creating a solution outside of business context, you're not going to create business value, so you're wasting time and money, frankly. So you've got to spend a lot of time understanding the context of what you're creating as a solution. Not understanding stakeholder responsibilities. Again, this is all related to stakeholder engagement. But you got to understand, not just engage with stakeholders, but understand what their role is in the solution, and because they might not know, they might not have a full understanding. So as a team, so there's individual engagement and there's collective team engagement, and as a team, we need to understand what people's roles are, who has responsibility for what, who's best placed to have responsibility for what in terms of their skills and experience. So there's a lot of working out who should be doing what at the start of solution architecture, and in particular the stakeholders that are going to contribute to the solution. Not gathering non-functional requirements. This is a really key thing, and it's probably not so much an issue now, but I think at the early start of Agile, it definitely was an issue, because Agile would tend to be feature focused, as in delivering features. How does non-functional fit in that? I think there's good approaches to this now within various Agile methods, but you've got, so your solution must address the non-functionals, and as I mentioned in an earlier slide, you could have a fully featured solution which ticks all the boxes in terms of feature, but it's still worthless because it's unusable, because of it might let you down in terms of performance or resilience or security, whatever. So you need to make sure up front you understand non-functionally what the solution needs to do. Not prioritizing requirements. In the earlier slide, I showed the requirements jumble. If everyone wants their requirements at the same time, you're going to be what I call thrashing between different so-called priorities, and you good chance you're going to work very inefficiently and possibly achieve very little. So you need to have a prioritization approach agreed with the stakeholders and collectively prioritize requirements. And that doesn't mean it's a one-off prioritization. This is very much continuous. So you're going to continually, probably at the start of every sprint, and ongoing, prioritize your requirements. And not having a requirements but history repository or backlog really will cause you issues. You need to, I mean, it doesn't need to be using some fancy requirements tool. Again, it's very much down to organizational preference. But you do need a consistent approach that everyone's aware of, which is well communicated, well established, and you need to have a lifecycle process around requirements. It's not just a case of getting requirements in written. There's also ongoing validation, verification of requirements, implementation and acceptance, as I showed in the previous slide. So again, much more detail in the book around each of these areas and pitfalls around these areas. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour of the people, process and requirements part of the solution architecture framework. So just to reiterate, people are your stakeholders, be it the people at the business level that are driving the solution from a business needs perspective. The people might be involved in implementing the solution or operating the solution or specialists around the solution. So that's the people part. The process part is the business process you're trying to implement, or the solution is trying to help. Then I've outlined some techniques and around how to identify and elaborate on business process. And then finally, there's the requirements part of this. So how you elicit, how you analyze the requirements, what's your requirements engineering process, what's your prioritization method, where do you store those requirements and manage the life cycle of requirements using some sort of requirements backlog method. So all those three elements, people, process, requirements, this all links up into what is driving the solution. Without your stakeholders, your people, without your process, and without your requirements, you're going to be doing a solution architecture effectively in isolation. And that's the last thing you want to do in terms of creating an unoptimal solution architecture. You just won't get there. So this is a really, really important topic. I was in two minds to have this as the first topic before solution architecture. They effectively go hand in hand. You would work, these two topics are really, really important to be done together, be it the solution architect working with the business analyst, or solution architect may be the business analyst, depends on the roles in the organization, but these two topics really set off the start of the solution. So that's really everything from me. The next video is going to be getting into more design parts of the architecture, feeding into the design. So the application, the data design, and then deployment and infrastructure. So that's this video, just a summary of the book. So the book's available on Amazon. These are my contact details. I'm absolutely delighted to hear from anyone who wants to collaborate, ask any questions, just have a chat and discussion. It's an area, a subject I'm really passionate about. I'm really interested. I've done it for many years, and I'm always delighted to chat with anyone about it. So these are my details here. So thanks very much. I shall see you in the next video, and thank you and goodbye.